This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome to Elected, a podcast for women in and around politics. I'm your host, Sarah Elder-Chamanara, and this week my guest is Rebecca Schulz, the Minister of Childcare for the province of Alberta, and actually Minister of all Children's Services for the province of Alberta. But before we get into all of that stuff, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. So in the spirit of reconciliation, it's important to me on my journey to acknowledge and share that I am personally and professionally committed to learning the history of colonialism and the ongoing systemic violence against Indigenous peoples. The land on which I live, work, and play is the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, the Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, Métis Nation Region 3, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. So today, Rebecca Schulz, the Minister of Children's Services, is joining me to talk all things childcare and women in politics. So I've already let the minister know that I condensed her bio to make it as short as possible because I just feel like they just sometimes go on a little bit too long. And so for those of you who don't know, Minister Schulz was elected to the Legislative Assembly of Alberta in 2019 as the MLA for Calgary-Shaw. She is a wife and a mom of 2 young children. She has a master's degree from Johns Hopkins in communications, I believe. And you were appointed as Alberta's Minister of Children's Services in 2019 following the election. So welcome. And I hope I got that part about the degree in communications correct.
That was correct. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thanks for joining me today. I'm really excited to have this conversation. For a lot of reasons about being a woman in politics, but also, the childcare deal that was signed in Alberta, which was like monumental and so many people were so overjoyed with. And so let's just get into it. So you and I have actually met in person a couple of times before, and it was lovely getting to meet you. For anyone who's listening who hasn't had the opportunity, tell me a little bit about yourself and, how did you get into politics and that's just an open-ended question, but just like, tell me everything in all the ways, whatever you want to say.
You're like, tell me everything, but keep it short so we can get to the question.
Yes.
And so that's a good question. I got involved in politics. I had always been interested. And Sarah, you heard me talk about this at an event a couple of weeks ago with some young women from the university who were asking about getting into politics and maybe not feeling super confident about it. And that was me. So I didn't get involved in campus politics. I maybe didn't know how, or maybe wasn't really that confident in my political knowledge. And I ended up getting involved in 2019. I was working at a company called Sask Energy. It was in Saskatchewan. And as a Crown Corporation for natural gas, we worked really closely with the minister's office. And I got to know my boss had worked for at that time it was the government. There was an NDP government in Saskatchewan, and he was friends with Premier Brad Wall's communications director from when they were working on opposite sides of the aisle. And so I had asked him once, how does one get one of those jobs in the Premier's office? Like, I love politics. I watch Question Period every day. And the next day I came up to my office and he said, how would you like to go over there? Well, that was shocking. I was 25 and my first job was working in the Premier's office doing media relations and communications. And it was amazing. I loved it so much. I had gone over on a 6-month term, and then I decided to leave my predictable job for a job in politics. And I have loved every minute of it. That's when I started campaigning getting involved in different elections. But then when I decided to run was I had moved to Alberta. I guess it was maybe 8 or 9 years ago now, 8, 7. Either way, I got involved because of Unity. I got involved in the Unity campaign. I wanted to see this new party, be what I had hoped it would be. And then when I was sitting there talking to some friends, and my husband had come home and he said, hey, somebody asked me if you'd ever want to run because you're really interested in politics. And I said, oh, that's so nice of them. And then the next day I woke up and said to my husband, but I've always wanted to run. And so how does that become, oh, that's so nice to heck yeah, I should do this. And now is the time. And so it was really at the very first UCP AGM. I listened to Ronna Ambrose talk about how many times women have to be asked to run, like 3 to 8 times. And often we tell ourselves things like, well, first I need some more board experience, then I need an MBA or a law degree. And those were things that I had said to myself. And then I listened to Brad Wall talk about compassionate conservative governments. And I know this is obviously not a partisan podcast, but I have to tell some of that to tell my story.
Yeah.
And then I listened to now Premier Kenney talk about, the vision for Alberta and bringing back the Alberta Advantage, creating jobs, growing the economy. And so I just decided now is the time. I had worked in politics. Obviously I had a supportive partner who had also worked in politics. We knew what we were getting ourselves into, having 2 young kids. And ultimately as well, I looked down at my daughter. I remember sitting in my kitchen at the island and I looked down, she was 4 months. So as you can imagine, she was, just starting to sit up on her bum and like sitting there, and she's got these big blue eyes. And I thought, I don't want decisions like that to be so hard for her. Right? I want to make this path easier for her. And if people like me then don't put my name forward, not only do, I not then have that ability to bring my voice, the voice of working parents, to the table where decisions are being made, but I also want for future generations, those decisions to not have to be so hard.
Yeah. No, I mean, I dare anyone to look into the eyes of a child and say, I don't want to make the world a better place for you. Like, that would be difficult to do. That's so interesting. And also, I mean, it's great that you had that experience as staff, but also, I mean, putting your background in communications and then obviously having a master's in it. And then I'm so curious if your staff, like what your staff thinks sometimes, because you must have very specific ideas or maybe feedback on like how to communicate different issues and like do different things, which is, I think, is a total asset at the table, because you can look at things differently and how you present them to the public. Does that ever, do you ever have those moments?
Yeah. And, this was, again, I can't remember how many years ago this was, but I was working at the Ministry of Education. And one of the leaders there, I remembered, we were having a meeting with him as the communications department and the leadership in that department. And he said, communications is really valuable, because if you look at a policy from the lens of how do I explain this policy to the public, if you can't do that and you can't answer the questions of why are we doing this? Who are we doing it for? How is it going to impact people? Then maybe we don't have the right policy. And so, I think as much as I had told myself, I need that MBA, I need a law degree, a background in communications helps with a different type of lens. How is the policy that we are striving for going to impact the public? What questions are they going to ask me about this? Do we have it quite right? And so, yes, I mean, now, I joke sometimes, once a staffer, always a staffer. Sometimes I'm, particular about the communications, or I like to try to do things myself. But, it's a good lens to bring to that. And so instead of feeling like, oh, I wish I was a lawyer, I'm glad I was a communicator, because if I can't communicate something quite right, then tell me, when I'm working with constituents, tell me how we can make this better.
Yeah.
What does this mean to you?
Yeah. So much of politics
mean to you?
It's so much of it is communicating what you're doing, and to your point, how you're doing it and why you're doing it. And if you can't share that message in a way that people understand, then you're failing to articulate, government policy. And so essentially you're losing out on missing an opportunity. Like, you're losing out on being able to explain how, why government, whatever government it may be, is doing something to make life better, for example, in XY way. And it's so interesting right now to see post federal budget and how, in my opinion, and I've said this publicly on Twitter, that I think that the federal Liberals right now are having some challenges around communicating all of the good things that they're trying to do and get out the door, in stark contrast with Pierre Poilievre, a federal Conservative candidate who is excelling at telling stories and creating a really powerful, compelling narrative on specific issues, like most recently housing. And I see it as a stark contrast, and it should be a lesson to anyone in politics about how to communicate and how to do it. Like, honestly, I don't necessarily like whether you agree with him or not, like he is teaching everyone how to communicate.
And I know the video you're talking about, and I actually watched it twice because it really breaks down a very complex issue of why are housing prices so high, breaks down the issue in a way that people can understand, but then also says, so here's the solution, which sometimes is hard to do in, today's world of social media and, less than 200 characters and 30-second sound bites, right?
Yeah, no, it's everyone needs, even if like agree with him or not, conservative or not, if you are in the business of political communication, like you have to watch everyone to see what they're doing. Anyways, that is not what this podcast was supposed to be about. I'm totally taking it off track.
That's another episode.
It is. Okay, back on track. Childcare. So tell me how it happened. Like, did like one day your office get a call from like the federal from Ottawa being like, hello, we would like to negotiate a childcare deal with you. Can you please like how did it start? What was like the timeline? And was the federal election, did that interrupt it at all? And then how did you get that back on track?
Yeah, and I've been pretty public. I was quite public about this the whole way through the process, but I'm happy to walk through kind of what it looks like now. Looking back, I think of just how hard we worked on that. At first we were waiting for our term sheet, which essentially sets out the parameters of a negotiation. So we were waiting, and then in talking to some other provinces, they had already gotten their term sheets. And then the next day, BC had an agreement. And I thought, but Alberta hasn't even gotten a term sheet yet. So we got on the phone with the federal government, and we had been in discussions about what this agreement might look like and what childcare looks like in Alberta and the types of things that Albertans would want to see in that agreement. And so we were quite surprised with that. And so we called them, said, yes, we are serious. We want to negotiate. We need our term sheet to kick off that process. And then we essentially rolled up our sleeves to come up with a bit of a plan, and not really knowing what exactly they wanted that to look like. But then we did hear that as we were working through the negotiations, we heard obviously that a federal election was imminent. We didn't know what that looked like, called our federal counterparts and said, look, if there's an election, we don't want Albertans to be left behind. So we came back, and this was again in the media with let us invest this. We know we can invest it in a way that works for you and for us, and respect the choices that Albertans are making. We know the parameters, generally speaking, and they said, no, we are not giving you a no strings attached deal like Quebec. And so we came back with a little bit more detail. And right up until the election was called, I was driving around southern Alberta, in between meetings, talking on my phone in the car, and really thinking we were going to be able to get this agreement done before the election was called. And that didn't happen. But, that's okay. We took the 4 or 5 weeks of the election period to really, they came back and said, well, here's a couple of things we want a little bit more information on. And as much as I was disappointed, we did go back to flush out some of the details that they were looking for. And I think during some of those negotiations, I didn't want there to be any thought that this was ideological or Alberta is just being contrary because we want to be contrary. It was really because we had a $25 a day pilot program. We had feedback from Alberta parents and childcare operators about what they wanted to see. And we knew that we had to fight for some flexibility, that, a program that left out 60 to 70% of our operators and the majority of our spaces was not going to work for Albertans. So there had to be a better way. And so to kind of help with that narrative, I spent those weeks also getting letters of support, for example, from organizations on our Supporting Working Parents group, which included private operators, large nonprofit operators, to really show, we mean it. We are coming to the table in good faith and we want an agreement, and that I truly believe that we could get to an agreement that both meets the overall goals of the federal government to reduce childcare fees by half this year, which we're already doing now, and get to an average of $10 a day over time, and respect the fact that this is an area of provincial jurisdiction. So after the election, we were excited day after the election, send this package forward. And then we had a couple weeks wait until there was a new minister in place. And once that happened, we had a call within days of the new minister being appointed, and then ultimately had a deal. We're still working through some things, especially around private operators and what that looks like. But even though we were not one of the first to sign an agreement, we were one of the first 2 provinces to roll out affordability dollars to parents, which is something that I'm really proud of.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about that, because was that something that you negotiated upfront, in contrast with other provinces?
Yeah. So every province has a slightly different action plan, right? The dollars are set out kind of based on your population and population of children. And obviously the federal government wants to see nonprofit spaces prioritized, but that just doesn't work when 70% almost of our market is private operators, and not that's not a bad thing. These are people that when the economy was really good and working parents really needed childcare, they stepped up in true Alberta entrepreneurial spirit to say, hey, I will open up this childcare center because I want to help out my neighbors. And so we wanted to make sure that they were included. And that is something that we've seen some other provinces signed agreements that don't include private operators, but even our nonprofits said, hey, we need the innovation and creativity of the private sector to meet these space creation goals. Just for a variety of reasons. We see a lot of space creation growth in the private sector, and it is sometimes faster. And there wasn't a correlation when we took, okay, here's nonprofit, here's private operators. There wasn't a correlation between quality. We've got lots of high quality centers in both, and there wasn't a correlation necessarily in cost or fees. And so, rolling this out, then each province had some flexibility in terms of, okay, what first? For us, we chose, why am I here? I'm here to make sure that we make life easier for working parents right across the province. And so my first priority was helping parents with their childcare fees. We also saw, enrollment go down during the pandemic for a variety of reasons, probably partially uncertainty with the pandemic, partially, I think, because of the economic situation at the time. And my thought was, if we can reduce fees for parents, they will be more likely to enroll their kids back in their childcare centers. And we've seen that. We were kind of hovering around 50% enrollment during the pandemic for a long time. And even from January to February, I think we grew from 75% enrollment to 79. So almost 80%. That is good. That is pre-pandemic levels. That means these childcare operators can continue to operate, and parents have access to what they need to go back to school or take part in the workforce.
Well, and we know that COVID disproportionately impacted women as primary caregivers, myself included in that. Essentially from March of last year until of 2020, until September of 2020, I had the flexibility, in quote, air quotes, and my husband didn't. And so I was with the kids during the day, trying to, work on my phone or my laptop in, the few minutes that I could, or during nap time. And then when they went to bed, then I was, back at work. It's like double duty. And so when women have the ability, when kids can be in childcare, the participation of women in the workforce and the economy is always a good thing. So I know that we're on a very specific time cap, and I have several questions for you that different people have shared with me to ask you. So if it's okay, we'll get into that. So question number one, and if I understand maybe some of these, like if there's a really technical point, maybe I can share this with your staff and then we can follow up, and then I could get that answer to someone if you can't, because Absolutely. Not being able to answer a question is completely okay. So one person asked, will childcare costs still be eligible for a deduction from income on federal income taxes?
So typically I would say I don't speak for the federal government, but I do know the answer to this, because right now you can deduct childcare fees from your taxes at tax time. You absolutely can. And so for parents who are accessing unlicensed childcare, that is not part of the agreement. The agreement was that it has to be licensed because it has to be something we can track, right? We can't track where dollars are going in something that is outside of our license system. So there isn't a way to do that. But yes, so for the remainder of your fees, which are on average 50% lower now that these dollars have started rolling out, yes, the amount that you still pay, you can absolutely claim that for your deduction. Alternatively, if you're in unlicensed childcare and that is your choice, you can claim that as well.
Okay, great. Hopefully that answers the question for that person. So the next one is a question about early childhood educator wages. Is there something or was there something in the deal that increased the amount of pay for ECE workers, because they are pretty underpaid considering the very important work they do?
So early childhood educators are the number one way that we can ensure that we have high quality childcare. I can tell you, I would not be here without the amazing early childhood educators that helped me, and supported my children. My kids now are almost 7 and 4. And when I decided to run, they were 3 and 4 months. So I would not be here without those amazing women and men. But what I would say is this: there is absolutely money in this agreement to address that. However, the feedback that we heard during our consultations, we did the biggest consultation province-wide in childcare in over a decade. The feedback that we heard in terms of where things were at, it varied from region to region and center to center. We do have among the highest wages, especially for our level 3s, but also there's flexibility. So I think it's 70% of operators pay over and above the base. They already do that.
The base being minimum wage, or?
No, the base it's minimum wage plus the government provides a wage top up based on the years of experience and essentially it's a level of certification that an educator has. And so we did commit within our action plan to look at those levels, to make changes where they're needed. And right now, actually, as we speak this month, consultations are happening, roundtables with childcare operators and early childhood educators are happening so that we can figure out how to get that exactly right. But there is $300 million earmarked for that. But we also invest in a lot of professional development. We know that's really important. If we can move educators up through those levels from an early childhood educator 1 to a 2 to a 3 by helping support them with education opportunities. We also made some changes to support the operators. So when you have an educator that's going to school, we want to be able to backfill so that they can bring somebody else into the center and make it doable, essentially, for educators to access professional development too. So there's those two components, and we're consulting on that right now.
And is there any difference between in that for a licensed versus an unlicensed childcare provider?
Again, unlicensed is not part of this agreement. And by the nature of not being licensed, like I said, we track educators and operators within that license system. And that's the system we use to roll out the wage top-up dollars and the professional development dollars to centers. Okay,
great. Thank you. Okay, this is from someone else. They said there's some misinterpretation with regards to the grant in the form. And they think it's the form of the use of the word attendance. Can you please?
I know what you're talking about.
Yes. Can you please confirm that it's interpreted as paid attendance hours, not actual attendance hours?
Yes.
And I think this is a very common question.
It is, although nothing has changed from how it was previously. So if you pay, if you're an operator and you have a family that paid for, a month of childcare, but they took 2 weeks off in the summer to go camping. Historically, we wouldn't have, you base it on the enrolled space and what the parents have paid for or enrolled their child, not whether or not they attended. And so that hasn't changed. We have clarified that on a number of our town halls and made sure that information is available, but it is a good question.
Okay. So again, that falls into this person who actually, they had a chance to meet you, so they had a chance to ask some of these questions. I know, but other people might have similar questions. So I'm going to ask a couple more. Can you please confirm that the subsidy that is different to the grant is applied for by the parents and goes directly to the parents. So who gets that money and who does it?
Yes. So there is a grant that goes directly to the operators to reduce your fees. So that goes based on, there's one amount for currently licensed facilities and day homes based on the average fees of each of those settings across the province. So that is how the operators will reduce your fee. However, in Alberta, and this is different than some of the agreements that were signed by other provinces, because we wanted to make sure that we were essentially making sure that we were able to support those who really need it most. Because that was one of the things we heard in $25 a day pilot, was sometimes the parents who knew how to access or navigate wait lists and programs, they got those spaces, but then parents who really needed those supports didn't get that support. And so we wanted to also provide some additional supports to those who really needed it. And so, yes, parents can then, on top of that reduced fee, they can still apply for a subsidy. The money still goes to the center to reduce the fee for parents so that parents don't have to pay it and then get reimbursed. So it just goes to lower the fee that parents have to pay in the first place.
Okay. And then one last question. So this is from a parent who says that they lost their subsidy, actually. So they said they understand the need to subsidize lower incomes, but they're the only earner in their household, and they are now not qualifying for a subsidy when they did before. They would like to know if you would consider a policy specifically for single mothers with school-age children, and how they can support them when there is no school. So during summer vacation or spring breaks, and that and you and I would both know this, that it's hard to work when you don't have childcare.
Yeah. And, school age children, that's one thing we did ask the federal government for that in our negotiations. That's not something that they were interested in supporting at this time, just because the costs really are higher when children are 0 to 5. That said, provincially speaking, we still support wage top-ups for educators in out-of-school care. We also extended subsidy for families throughout the summer, right, when the cost of childcare would be higher because it's full-time as opposed to part-time. The subsidy for out-of-school care goes up to $90,000 a year of household income, but the subsidy levels in this new agreement for 0 to 5, that goes up to $180,000 a year of income. So we haven't found a case where a family is in fact paying more under this agreement than under the last one. But I think another key point is that every province is going to roll this out over 5 years. So where some provinces picked, okay, these centers will roll it out first, and then the next ones will roll it out after that. Our approach is really, look, we saw that in $25 a day, where 7,000 parents or families kind of were having those additional supports, but then the childcare center down the road wasn't able to access those. So we didn't want that. So it was a bit over 7,000 children, I believe, in 122 centers. Now we have 77,000 benefiting through this combination of affordability grants and subsidies. But what that means is, instead of rolling it out center by center, we've rolled it out to everybody. And then over the 5 years, those amounts are going to increase. So right now, an average childcare fee in Alberta, because of these operating grants, will be about somewhere between $22 and $25 a day. Obviously, that depends on the fees that your operator charges, but it's about $23 to $25 a day. Now, in the next year of this plan, those grants and that investment is going to bring the average fee of childcare down to $15 a day. And then by year 5, it moves to an average of $10 a day. And so, yes, it's a little bit of a different approach, but it benefits everybody in all licensed childcare, whether it's day homes, whether it's facility-based. And, Sarah, you brought up flexibility a little bit earlier for parents who are working from home, or maybe they're working for part-time preschool. It's amazing. We have early childhood educators working in preschools. Sometimes they both work in a preschool and a childcare center, and they largely in the past were left out. So we included that as well, knowing that that's an option that a lot of working parents make too.
Okay. One more question, and then I know we're out of time. Okay. And I'm going to try, if you can make this a yes or no question, I will be highly impressed. Okay. Politically, might be horrible, but we'll see. Okay. One last question. This person wants to know, could stay-at-home moms with preschool-age children get some kind of compensation? Is it possible to answer that with a yes or no answer?
Well, yes, but it's because the operating grants that go to preschool fees are being reduced for preschools through the operating grant. And so
well, I think they want to know if they have preschool age children, but they're at home. So essentially,
okay.
would you compensate parents for who have their kids at home who aren't in an outside program?
Again, I don't want to speak for the federal government, but again, that was something we asked them, and they were not interested in funding that. However, what the federal government did tell me is there is the Canada Child Benefit, which does go to parents. Obviously, now it's income tested. When it was brought in originally, it was not. It was universal. So there are still some supports like that go to support these families. And in Alberta, we also have the Alberta Child and Family Benefit, but again, that is income-based as well.
Okay. Well, valiant attempt at that. Like some
I'm
questions.
Sorry, I didn't get that to a yes or no.
Don't worry. I mean, I would love to do a round of like yes or no questions with a politician, and then like if they say yes but or no but, and then they would like fall through that door, and it'd be like it would be like a communications game, I guess. Anyways, we're out of time. Thank you so much for your making time and for answering all of these questions. The people who asked them, I'm sure will be delighted that you answered them. Yeah, thank you so much. I know you have a busy day, so I appreciate you being open to doing this and to having conversations about, women in politics and childcare. And obviously issues always pop up. And so getting people answers is always a good thing.
Well, and I just want to say thank you because, I even think to the event that we were at, and there was a mom saying, look, like I have 3 children, I have a new baby, and I was essentially working for no income. And now because of this agreement, I'm making an income. Yeah. I know how big of a deal this is for working families, and it really is good news. And while we were kind of taking some heat for not signing fast enough, I won't apologize for that because we've got a deal that works for Alberta. And I think we're also showing that we're willing to make changes where they need to be made as we roll it out. So thank you so much.
Well, I mean, you definitely didn't come in last because Ontario just signed their deal. So, politics is politics, right? And you're always going to find someone who's going to say, should have been faster, it should have been slower. Why did you do this? Why didn't you do this? Do this differently. It's just the deal got signed. So that's a good thing for people who are now benefiting. So thank you very much. And I have no idea when I'll see you again or talk to you again, but I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Well, hopefully it's soon. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Take care.
Thanks. This was another episode of Elected. Until next time, I'm Sarah Elder-Chamanara, and today's guest was Rebecca Schulz. Thanks for joining us.